Explained. Explained is the class the Foundation hates admitting exists because it means they were wrong about something long enough to build a whole file on it. The case of SCP-500-EX starts in 1892 when a letter reached OFIV-11 from Senior Commander Horace Meyer at Site-11 describing something he'd bought for 25 cents in Norwalk, Ohio, a 6-pill pack called Miracle Migraine pills, manufactured by the Spring Blossom Medical Corporation, founded in 1878 under CEO Arthur Jackson Swanson. Meyer's leg cramps vanished after taking one. That kind of speed gets flagged instantly, and by the time Spring Blossom's pills had spread across 10 states and into Ontario, the Foundation had launched a full investigation. An 80-pill trial followed, and the results were inconsistent in exactly the way real medicine never is. Cornelius Huckleberry's insomnia cleared in 4 days. Chelsea Dreyfus's migraine disappeared in 9 hours. And John Fullman, given the pills for stomach cancer, showed no improvement at all and died 4 months later. A true anomaly doesn't pick and choose who it saves. In March of 1894, investigators sat down with Swanson himself at the Booty House Hotel in Toledo and asked him how the pills worked. He wouldn't say. All in the magic, he told them. It's just a little personal secret that I myself know. It wasn't magic, it was sugar, pressed into tablets and sold with total confidence to people desperate enough to believe it, and belief turned out to be the whole mechanism. The placebo effect, one of the most documented phenomena in real medicine, was strong enough to fool a global containment agency for 2 years. Spring Blossom's remaining staff were quietly amnesticized by 1913, and the file was closed under a class built for exactly this outcome. No force field, no entity, no breach, just a conman's product line, and a species that heals faster when it's told to. That's the quiet joke buried inside Explained. Somewhere in a filing cabinet, the most dangerous thing the Foundation ever chased turned out to be hope, sold at 25 cents a pack. Neutralized. Neutralized doesn't mean destroyed, it means over, and SCP-1470 might be the strangest, gentlest case the Foundation ever closed this way. It was an Australian jumping spider, the species Portia fimbriata, just 6.3 millimeters long, and somehow it was telepathic, with a broadcast range of roughly 9 meters. Researchers built it a custom terrarium, soundproofed 3/4 of a meter by 2 meters, with a designated podium where contact happened, and interviewed it 3 times a day on a schedule built around its nocturnal habits. The translations came through filtered into a broad, distinctly Australian dialect, its palps rendered as arms, its abdomen as its arse, as if some very specific personality was riding along inside the signal. At one point, researchers painted a red stripe on it, hoping to trigger courtship behavior in a nearby male. It backfired spectacularly, and SCP-1470 reported the encounter afterward with real indignation. She smacked her lips at me and gave me a good drumming with her arms and legs. I had to tie a bungee and make a jump for it, before sailing back to me, tent to nurse me pride. For a while, the Foundation had a genuine two-way relationship with an arachnid that talked like it had spent time in a pub. Then, near the end, something changed. In its final interview, SCP-1470 was somehow shown its handler's actual physical scale for the first time, and the reaction was described as wordless dread. It fled the podium and refused all contact for 2 hours. When it finally came back, it wasn't to talk science. It came back to say goodbye. Roughly 3 months into containment, it died of natural causes. Its species simply doesn't live long, and it hadn't even reached maturity when it was found, giving it a total lifespan of maybe 4 months, telepathy or not. The Foundation didn't destroy it. They didn't even really lose it, not in the violent sense that phrase usually carries. They just watched a strange, funny, oddly self-aware little accident of nature run out a clock nature had already set and quietly updated the file from safe to neutralized. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite SCP. Let's get back into the video. Pending. Pending is the class for when the Foundation genuinely doesn't know what happened, and SCP-3557 is the file that proves it. At 0427 UTC on March 18, 2016, every anomaly detector the Foundation operates on Earth triggered within the same second, flagging a 99.99% probability of a CK-class reality restructuring, the internal term for an event large enough to rewrite existence itself. The numbers behind it were staggering. Over 6,738,000,000 discrepancies logged between extra-dimensional records and Earth's own timeline. Site-04 went dark entirely, marked not responding, presumed lost. Site-08 dropped into partial lockdown. And at exactly the same instant, every baseline specimen the Foundation held of SCP-2608 died simultaneously across every facility on the planet. Only specimens kept in cryogenic storage or extra-dimensional pockets survived. By 0511, less than an hour later, 056 issued a public statement calling the entire event a false alarm. That was a cover story. Internally, Ontokinetics Division Lead Dr. Leslie Yolis kept the real investigation running, and researchers walked away from it with 4 competing, unresolved theories. Maybe it was an extra-normal event, a one-time occurrence never to repeat. Maybe the world had already been quietly restructured and nobody could prove it, which would push the case toward Apollyon. Maybe it could happen again, which would demand Keter. Or maybe, the bleakest option, it wasn't an anomaly at all. Just a Foundation-wide malfunction with no cause behind it. $3 million went toward building a second generation of detectors, with full deployment projected to cost as much as $75 million. None of it answered the actual question. Yolis closed her memo on the case with a line that could serve as the Foundation's entire philosophy. Our methodology at the Foundation is one of the utmost caution at any cost. Somewhere, every detector on Earth remembers the second reality supposedly broke, and years later, not one person can prove what actually broke it. Safe. Safe sounds like the most boring class on this list, right up until you meet SCP-500. It's a canister of small red pills stored in a cool, dry place away from bright light, and each pill cures any disease in the person who swallows it, usually within 2 hours. The Foundation has never managed to synthesize a single replacement pill, so every dose is finite, and access is heavily restricted. The count has been tracked obsessively over the decades. It started at 47, it actually climbed to 57 after one pill was used during a trial against SCP-008, a zombie plague anomaly, curing a subject even in the disease's most advanced stage. From there, the number dipped again, spent on tests involving SCP-914, an SCP-409 exposure, an SCP-221 case, and an attempt to clone the pills using SCP-338, a cloning anomaly that only worked about 30% of the time, with the copies losing potency the longer they existed. Not every use was sanctioned. In one incident, a D-Class worker stole a pill simply to cure a hangover and was terminated for it. Dr. Klein's response afterward, preserved word for word in the file, doesn't hold back. SCP personnel below level 3 are now banned from handling SCP-500. This is not to be used to cure a hangover, get AIDS, and then ask permission. Even a formal request to study whether the pills caused a kind of mental compulsion, an obsessive fixation in anyone who learned about them, was denied outright, dismissed in the file as too trivial to bother investigating. And that's really the whole definition of safe laid bare. It was never about how powerful or valuable an object is. It's about whether the box behaves the same way every single time. SCP-500 always does exactly one thing: cure whatever's wrong, cleanly, predictably, without surprises, which is precisely why it earns the calmest label in the entire system, even while sitting on top of one of the most desperately wanted objects the Foundation has ever recovered. Decommissioned. Decommissioned means the Foundation looked at the cost of containment and decided destruction was cheaper, and SCP-42456 is one of the strangest ledgers they ever closed. The ship was named Soy Mi Amante, roughly I Am My Lover, a 16th century Spanish galleon that duplicated itself every 4 to 6 days in the nearest body of water large enough to hold her. The earliest record traces back to the year 1500, a letter from a sailor named Dante to someone he called My Queen, describing the ship struck down by unknown forces and reduced to ash in moments. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. To keep her calm, the Foundation had to pay roughly $519,000 in gold, silver, and gems, about 2,500 pounds of silver, every single cycle. Missed the deadline by 24 hours, and she animated fully, ramming and firing on anything nearby. Here's the detail that turns this from an expensive nuisance into a temporal nightmare. Tracked silver coins the Foundation used as payment were later recovered in Madrid's Museo Nacional del Prado, traced back to the year 1827, more than 3 centuries after they were supposedly paid out at sea. Researchers concluded the payments had been quietly bleeding back into Spain's real economy across history, possibly feeding directly into Spain's documented price revolution, an actual historical inflation crisis. In other words, the Foundation wasn't just funding a ghost ship, it might have been financing the past. The decommissioning department's formal proposal checked nearly every box available: excessively high risk of a lifted veil scenario, unsustainable expense, serious legal concerns, and, listed under other, by Dr. D. Eon, temporal phenomena caused by a causality paradox. A director signed off, department heads signed off, and a ship that had been Keter class, uncontainable, and quietly rewriting Spanish economic history for 500 years was deliberately burned out of existence with full institutional authorization. That's the line separating Decommissioned from everything else in this system. It isn't panic, it's a paper trail, a signature, and a controlled fire, closing a debt that Containment alone could never have paid down. Euclid. Euclid is where most of the Foundation's world actually lives, and no object defines it better than SCP-173, the very first anomaly ever cataloged on the site. It's a statue built from concrete and rebar, roughly 2 meters tall, carrying faint traces of Krylon brand spray paint that hint at a very ordinary, very human origin somewhere in its past. It was relocated to Site 19 in 1993, and beyond that, its origin is officially listed as unknown. What isn't unknown is what it does. SCP-173 cannot move while someone is looking directly at it. Break eye contact, even to blink, and it closes the distance instantly, and those attacks have proven lethal. So the containment procedure is built entirely around blinking. 2 personnel must maintain direct eye contact on it at all times, taking turns, alerting each other before either one blinks, and the chamber door is relocked the second any team steps inside. Guards stationed nearby report something stranger still: scraping sounds coming from inside the sealed container whenever no one is present to witness it. Sounds that have been logged, matter-of-factly, as normal. The floor of its enclosure holds a reddish-brown substance, a mix of feces and blood whose source has never been identified, and the chamber is cleaned on a strict bi-weekly schedule regardless. Here's the pivot that separates Euclid from safe: predictability. Safe-class objects behave the same way every time, no surprises. SCP-173 doesn't offer that comfort. Its exact mechanism, what it actually is, why unbroken eye contact matters so much, remains only partly understood even now, and that gap in knowledge is the entire point of the class. Attack scenarios here fall under what the Foundation formally labels a Class 4 hazardous object containment procedure, the kind of language reserved for things that can kill trained personnel through nothing more than a moment's inattention. SCP-173 doesn't need to escape the room to prove how dangerous it is. It just needs one tired guard, mid-blink, and a floor that's already stained from the last time someone learned that the hard way. Cernunnos. Cernunnos is the class built entirely around cost, not danger, and SCP-4971 is the most haunting example the Foundation has on file. It's an abandoned shopping mall in Indiana called Southwood Park, opened in 1985, shut down in 2006 after its anchor store went under. On February 12, 2007, police responded to reports of screams and what witnesses called satanic rituals inside. By the time anyone with real authority arrived, 61 civilians and 4 responding officers were simply gone. Investigation traced the cause back to an eco-terrorist cult calling themselves the Daughters of Eden, led by a woman named Katerina Randolph, who had used half of a manuscript called The Last Appeal of Bai-Fi, written by a 17th century woman tortured and burned as a witch, to summon something the file calls only the one who knows silence in the earth. Past a specific storefront, the mall's geometry stops making sense entirely. The interior measures over 400,000 cubic meters, cycling through a perpetual sunset roughly every 12 to 13 hours, and time itself runs differently on the other side. Teams reporting a week's worth of experience for what was only hours outside. A counter-ritual exists on paper that could theoretically close the breach for good. It requires a human sacrifice every hour, doubling in frequency each hour after that, with no upper limit short of, in the file's own chilling phrasing, every human heart that has not yet known silence. The Foundation's Ethics Committee voted on it 7-0 against, and rather than force a solution nobody could stomach, the Classification Committee created an entirely new object class specifically for this case, in a ruling dated February 17th, 2019, 2 full mobile task forces were lost trying anyway, Epsilon 13 and Iota 44 encountering silent, bulletproof humanoid fragments of the people who vanished in 2007, and eventually something the file designates SCP 4971V, a titanic, headless, deer-like entity that tears hearts from bodies with its mind alone. Sporadic transmissions kept surfacing for years afterward. A data dump in October of 2007, a 6-minute video 9 days later, a single image in November reading "Only Still Here," and then, in June of 2015, 8 years after the mall first went dark, an 18-second clip surfaced of a terrified woman mouthing 2 words before the signal cut: "Can't run anymore." Nothing has come through since. Ticonderoga. Ticonderoga is for anomalies the Foundation cannot touch, and, in the case of SCP-6983, genuinely doesn't want to. On August 16, 2017, a Foundation deep space probe from the Beholder line caught something blinking against the rings of a distant planet and adjusted course to investigate. Thermal imaging picked out a humanoid figure roughly 5 meters tall, and within a week, by August 23rd, researchers had cracked its method of communication, a system functioning almost exactly like Morse code, flashed out in light from its fingertips. Its first clean message to the Foundation read simply, "I think I finally understand you." What followed was one of the strangest interviews on file. SCP-6983's job, as far as anyone can tell, is repair. It travels from world to world, welding torn planetary rings and damaged atmospheres back together, fingertip against gas and ice. And it had already quietly fixed one of the Foundation's own broken probes before anyone even noticed it existed. But its method is backwards from what the Foundation expected. It doesn't weld with heat. It welds with extreme cold bending space down near absolute zero, a distortion researcher Dr. Nails could only describe as bending reality itself in miniature. And that difference, it turned out, was the reason SCP-6983 was alone out there in the first place. It once belonged to a larger group of similar beings, entities capable of producing enormous heat, who traveled by burning holes straight through space and stepping through. SCP-6983 could never generate that kind of heat, could never open its own door, and the others eventually just left without it. The last thing it heard was that they'd gone to repair some broken world, and something had gone catastrophically wrong. Mid-interview, its light flickered, its hands trembled, and for the first time it managed to tear open a small hole in space on its own. It thanked Dr. Nails, promised to return the favor one day, and stepped through, explaining before it vanished that the universe never stops quietly falling apart at the seams, and someone has to keep holding the pieces together. Months later, a Foundation satellite caught a blue shine spreading across Earth's own atmosphere. When the light faded, a hole in the ozone layer that scientists had been tracking for years was simply gone, patched over, and signed with a single name: Kelvin. Archon. Archon looks like Ticonderoga from a distance, but the reasoning underneath is the opposite. SCP-3310 is real, or at least the surface of it is. Anyone can visit Crater Lake in Oregon today and see the actual Old Man of the Lake, a 9-meter hemlock stump that has floated upright in that water since at least the 1890s, a genuine tourist curiosity. According to the Foundation's file, that stump is a ritual anchor holding down something ancient and monstrous beneath the surface, an entity the local Klamath tradition calls Yao. The myth behind it is specific. Yao, an underworld god, once killed the sky god Skell and threw his heart to the animal spirits who secretly resurrected him. Skell returned, killed Yao in turn, cast his head into the lake to become the island now called Wizard Island, and threw his heart into the water beneath the stump. The Foundation first investigated in 1894, chasing an unrelated phantom airship report, and quietly lobbied to have the area declared a national park 2 years later, specifically to make long-term monitoring easier without raising suspicion. It worked. 7 distinct activation events have been logged since, whenever the stump's natural drifting was disturbed. In 1900, 1 hour produced 3 meters of rainfall. In 1917, winds reached 120 kilometers an hour, with modeling projecting a possible escalation to 300, grounding a winged entity with a 5 to 6 meter wingspan that couldn't fly through them. In 1945, the sky produced roughly 200 lightning strikes a minute. In 1996, hail up to 30 centimeters wide fell alongside 5 deer-like entities standing 2.5 meters at the shoulder. And in 2005, the lake summoned something 8 to 10 meters tall, fully humanoid, and immune to small arms fire. A note recovered from Wizard Island after the 1945 event, signed only Pangloss, put the situation into words better than any Foundation report has managed since. Some tombstones mark where the dead have been interred, while others serve to keep the dead interred. Lao's is of the latter. The Foundation's own Office of Tactical Theology, a real internal body dedicated to exactly this kind of threat, recorded elevated background radiation around the lake that spiked hardest during the most recent event. And one field agent's 2005 report described car-sized wolves howling at the shoreline while something resembling a UFO struck the lake's surface and bounced off it like solid concrete. Given all of that, the Foundation could remove the stump. They have the resources. They simply won't. Because the tombstone is doing exactly what a tombstone is supposed to do, right out in the open, in front of every tourist who ever stops to take a photo. Uncontained. Uncontained is the bluntest label the Foundation has, because it isn't really describing what an anomaly is. It's admitting that containment already failed. SCP-305 is one of the starkest cases on record. The facility that once held it, listed only as a unit with its designation blacked out in the surviving paperwork, was destroyed during a containment breach, and almost every file describing what SCP-3005 actually is was lost or corrupted in the chaos. Only a single test log survived intact, and it reads less like a scientific record and more like a slow descent. Earlier procedures referenced two specific countermeasures, one labeled Mode Veteracigate, built against an auditory and visual cognitohazard, and another labeled Mode Dubitamus, built against a purely theological threat, whatever that meant in practice. Whenever the object entered what the log calls its pink state, at least 11 personnel were required just to approach it safely, and any casualties from contact had to be dissolved afterward, never buried, never burned, never even touched directly. The surviving tests are the part that lingers. An apple placed near it vanished entirely after 20 minutes of exposure, not decayed, just gone. A D-class subject was reduced to what the log calls simply viscera in 8 minutes flat. A document describing something as mundane as a red-tailed hawk became unstable mid-test, its subject shifting uncontrollably between unrelated topics as though the page itself couldn't hold a single idea steady anymore. A phonograph recording grew louder and louder with no external cause, until researchers began logging genuine fear that the sound alone might collapse the facility around them. The tester behind these entries, identified only as Dr. A, followed by a blacked-out name, visibly unravels across the log's later pages, and it ends with him drilling a hole directly into SCP-3005's chamber to expose himself deliberately to whatever the pink light actually was. Nothing after that entry explains what happened to him, and no date for the eventual breach survives anywhere in the file. What's left today is procedural language stripped down to its coldest form. SCP-3005 is to be located and recontained as soon as possible. Somewhere, a task force is still combing through the wreckage of that breach, hunting a name attached to almost no information at all. Keter. Keter is the class most people associate with the entire SCP universe, and it earns that reputation through sheer, grinding difficulty, not raw destructive power alone. It doesn't mean an object is guaranteed to be the single most dangerous thing the Foundation holds. It means containing it reliably is exhausting, resource draining, and never fully solved. SCP-682, nicknamed the hard-to-destroy reptile, is the textbook case. Its chamber measures 5 meters in every direction, lined with 25 centimeters of reinforced acid-resistant steel, and kept flooded with hydrochloric acid deep enough to keep it submerged and incapacitated. Staff are forbidden from speaking to it at all, out of genuine fear of triggering what internal notes call a rage state, and a 50-kilometer radius around its site is kept permanently clear of human development. Here's the part that turns containment into a losing game. SCP-682 regenerates using gills that filter usable matter out of any surrounding liquid, meaning it can quite literally feed off the very acid meant to hold it down. Researchers have documented it functioning normally with 87% of its body destroyed or rotted away. It has breached containment 17 times, succeeding 6 of those, and recapturing it requires teams of at least 7. One termination attempt exposed it to SCP-409, triggering a crystallization reaction that reached 62% conversion before exploding violently. SCP-682 recovered. It's now fully immune to SCP-409. When a D-Class operator once asked why it kills so indiscriminately, Its answer, recorded seconds before it attacked the microphone operator directly, was simply, they were disgusting. Compare that to SCP-096, an entity that spends its days pacing the eastern wall of an airtight steel cube, standing 2.38 meters tall, with arms 1.5 meters long, covering a face nobody is allowed to see. Look at it, even by accident, and it screams, cries, and babbles for up to 2 minutes before running toward you at documented speeds of 35 kilometers an hour, homing in on your location with no need for line of sight. During one retrieval, a squad accidentally viewed its face at sub-zero temperature. It tore a corporal's leg off, absorbed close to 1,000 rounds, including 650 caliber rounds, fired in 20 seconds, and a direct anti-tank rocket that blew away half its torso, and never once flinched. It only calmed down once someone managed to cover its head with a bag. 2 completely different creatures, 2 completely different triggers. And yet both land in the same class, because Keter was never about matching one profile of danger. It's an admission, on paper, that the Foundation's grip can slip, has slipped before, and probably will again. Apollyon. Apollyon is the last stop before there's nothing left to contain, reserved for anomalies tied to what the Foundation calls a K-class scenario, shorthand for an event that ends the world as it currently exists. SCP-3999 is the starkest case on file, and it's unlike anything else on this list because the document describing it doesn't stay still. It's built around a Level 3 researcher named James Martin Talleyrand, and as events unfold, the containment procedures, the descriptions, even past interview logs begin contradicting and overwriting themselves in real time, as though whatever SCP-3999 actually is has started corrupting the paperwork the same way it corrupts everything else it touches. Entire passages collapse into a single word repeated hundreds of times over. Object classes shift mid-sentence. Orders reverse themselves before the ink, so to speak, is even dry. Buried inside that collapsing record is a final confrontation between Talleyrand and the entity itself, and his side of it reads less like a Foundation report and more like a eulogy. For the first 1,000,000 years, I survived, which is more than you can claim because you never lived at all. SCP-3999 doesn't answer him in words. The log record's only a system error, data corrupted, and then states plainly that it melted researcher Talleyrand, an event stretched out and logged as lasting 5 full years. By every earlier version of the file, that should have been the end. An unstoppable, world-ending anomaly with nothing left standing in its way, exactly the scenario Apollyon exists to describe. But a later, calmer version of the same document tells a different ending. Recovery teams eventually located SCP-3999 sealed inside an airtight Keter-class cell at Site-118 at the bottom of a kilometer-deep shaft lined with Scranton reality anchors every 30 meters, every single one of them blown out and destroyed. Talleyrand's body was down there with it, along with a phone still holding fragments of that same corrupted containment text. The conclusion drawn from what remained is almost unbearably simple. He went in after it, and somehow, at the cost of his own life, he actually stopped a ZK-class end-of-reality event from finishing what it started. Apollyon doesn't usually get an ending. This is the rare file where someone gave it one anyway, and paid for it in full. Thaumiel. Thaumiel is where this whole system flips inside out, and it's the perfect place to end, because everything up to this point describes something the Foundation is trying to control. Thaumiel describes something the Foundation built to use as a weapon. These objects exist specifically to contain or counteract other anomalies, and their existence is kept so secret that even most high-clearance staff never learn they're real. SCP-2000 is the clearest, most staggering example on file. Its entrance is disguised as a defunct ranger station inside Yellowstone National Park, hiding a facility that begins 75 meters below the surface and drops to 100 with an extra 10 square kilometers of usable floor space folded in through what the file calls a pseudo-Riemannian manifold, essentially bending space itself to make more room. It runs on a 1 gigawatt thorium reactor rated for 70 years of continuous service, backed by geothermal power for standby that could theoretically last indefinitely, and it can sustain up to 10,000 personnel indefinitely through its own hydroponics and recycled air and water. But the real purpose sits at its core, roughly 500,000 biological reconstruction units capable of producing 100,000 fully viable human beings a day after a 5-day warm-up, with the option to instantly age those subjects and implant complete memories through hypnotherapy and controlled hallucinogenics. This facility exists for exactly one scenario: total human extinction, an event the Foundation failed to prevent everywhere else. If that ever happens, one procedure activates the site, a second confirms every remaining Foundation location has gone dark, and a third, chillingly named Procedure Lazarus, repopulates the planet from a chosen point in history projected to rebuild something like the year 2000's level of civilization within 25 to 50 years. Internal policy caps how far back they're allowed to reset the clock, 20 years before the event, at most, a small mercy against playing God any further than necessary. 20-meter rings of Scranton reality anchors and 5 specialized causality stabilizing units, technology that traces back to 1889, keep the whole facility from tearing itself apart. And the file admits something unsettling almost in passing. SCP-2000 has already activated at least twice before, and the records from those earlier activations are gone. One surviving addendum describes a 25-day equipment failure that let the reconstruction units run completely unsupervised, producing 10 million anomalous humanoids with extra heart chambers and radio-emitting organs, every one of whom quietly died, unconscious, within 5 weeks. Another describes technicians finding human remains between 450 and 700 years old buried near the site, carrying credentials belonging to a researcher whose fingerprints don't match anyone currently employed. Somewhere beneath Safe, beneath Keter, beneath even Apollyon, the Foundation quietly built its own doomsday reversal switch, tested it more than once, and simply chose not to remember how. Which class surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments.